You know, it's not so many years since he drove down here, and the cutting rang to the sound of steel on steel. Not so many years, and yet it seems half a century ago. The cutting is quiet now, and an old man can wander through it and see the signs of the not so long ago. And he can remember.
Because the life of a tram car is practically endless. In fact, to get rid of ours, we had to burn them. There were great crowds that came here from all the, it was really the beach for the northern suburbs. And we ran services from everywhere to Balmoral. And we would have as many as on the return trip. There would be perhaps 50, 60 trams to leave within an hour.
The death of a tramway is somehow sad, but the funeral procession can be pretty merry. You might even have been at this one, the last journey from Sydney to La Perouse. And if you weren't there, you must have been one of the few who missed the big occasion. There wasn't even standing room. In Sydney, the first tram in Pitt Street began its first trip in 1861 from Circular Quay to the railway. It was popular enough, except with storekeepers and drivers of other vehicles. They protested so vehemently that it lasted only 5 years, and then the tracks were pulled up. Some of the early trams were double-deckers, and the first of them were all horse-drawn. Steam motors were imported about 1880, but until they arrived, and indeed for some years later, the horsepower really was horsepower.
When I was a boy going to school, the steam tram ran along Oxford Street, down Queen Street, and down Ocean Street, and terminated at the old council chambers. First of all, when they started the steam trams, I can recollect when they only used coke. And of course, coke was very clean, and there was no dirty smoke and grime coming back onto the passengers who were seated in the cars at the rear. I was attached to Fort Macquarie Depot, and we ran a service of trams to the old Redfern railway station. Of course, there was a huge horse cabs down there as well. But as I'm going in there, I noticed crossing George Street that a horse had fallen for some reason or other, and the man had fallen out as well, out of a delivery van. And when the horse got to his feet, there was a lady passing, and her dress somehow or other got caught in the shafts, and this lady was standing there with her dress all under the garments were exposed. And I ran across and released the lady's dress, and of course there was cheers from the few people who were around.
By the mid-80s, though, steam had taken over. This line ran through Cogra, and if the rush of modern traffic worries you, look back with envy to the more sedate and leisurely days. There was even time to stop on the way to call in at the butcher's. These were the good old days, before everyone began to shoot through like a Bondi.
Manly originally had steam trams before ever they had horse trams. When it first started, it ran from the Corso, from the boat, up the Corso, and along the ocean beach, and then to the North Stane, and that was the route which afterwards was altered.
While authorities were trying to work out whether steam would replace the horse, tramway men had grievances too. So what did they do? Of course they did. And Sydney had its first tram strike.
The tram strike took place, of course, in the morning. It was the first that they'd ever had, and the trams were piled up everywhere. There was a bit of a scene outside Anthony Horden's. The newspaper people made the most of it, and it showed a picture of their new shop with all this enormous crowd around there waiting to get into Horden's.
But even steam was on the way up. The last steam tram from Parramatta Park to Red Bank Wharf was taken off in 1941, but it had only been kept going as a tourist attraction. Electricity had come to the inner city in 1899 and to the nearer suburbs in the first few years of the 1900s. Cable trams began in 1894, and the service from King Street to Woollahra ran every 3 minutes. It was quite a service, and the fare from King Street to Ocean Street, Woollahra, was just threepence. The cable cars were cumbersome, and huge drums had to be installed to draw them. But where gradients were too steep for the steam trams, cable cars were essential. And before long, there was another service north of the harbour, covering North Sydney and Crow's Nest. It's interesting to note that Sydney had nearly 40 miles of tramways before the turn of the century. There were 114 steam motors in addition to the cable cars and horse-drawn trams. The cable cars, though, was something special.
I was very familiar with the King Street cable when it was introduced first. I was asked would I like to go for a ride, and I went up on this tram, of course rode on the cable. Later on, of course that was the best part of the cable tram to get on, and it was a place that was very much sought after always.
Melbourne, unlike Sydney, went in for cable trams in a big way. In fact, by 1885, it had the fourth largest cable tram system in the world, 43.5 miles of it. And many of the cable trams were still running in the 1920s, even though electricity had been adopted by some suburban tramway trusts many years earlier. The Box Hill and Doncaster line, which opened in 1889, was the first electric tramway operating in Australia. But this venture into electricity had only